All right. Hey, fellow nerds and dice goblins. Welcome back to You Heard It From Us Live. I'm Dungeon Master Eguile.
And I'm D&D Wife, and tonight we're asking the question that's got more than a few of you raising your eyebrows. Does size matter?
In tabletop games, of course. Get your minds out of the dungeon gutter. We're talking about why almost every PC is magically medium and that what size really means for at the table.
Yeah. We've got some weird rules, spicy hot takes, and questions for you, our can community, live. So whether you're a tiny terror or a gargantuan gremlin, there's room for you at our table tonight.
So roll initiative, flex your imagination, and let's make this episode larger than life. You're watching You Heard It From Us.
Yeah.
So I thought this up this morning, and it came up to me to kind of talk about this weird idea that we've had at our table come up multiple times, and that is the sizing of characters.
Right.
And what we found that there are so many facets to this. It's not just about the character's actual size, but even goes to such things as the minis.
The miniatures, right? There are so many differences and nuances that we get in our minis, but that aren't always reflected in the game.
Right. And so we just thought that would be like an interesting concept because at the end of the day, in standard 5e, really every character is pretty much medium. And even when a character is presumed to be large, they're just given a feature that gives them everything to be large, but doesn't actually let them be large.
At least not in combat where sizes usually matters.
In nothing.
That's true.
It literally will say you are not large. You can do everything that's large. You're just not a large creature.
You just don't count.
And so we thought that'd be an interesting question to ask for our community and all of our listeners and watchers as to what their take is on the idea about sizing within miniatures. And not only that, but within all things D&D and tabletop. Because it's not just about how big your mini is.
There are rules of gameplay that are affected too.
Yeah, and so for me on my end, right, looking at when it comes to the character sizing, one big thing that we do in our homebrew world, and as I'm a dungeon master, I'm allowing, is I allow all sizes of creatures, right? Because in my mind there are pros and cons, right? Like the real way I look at it is if you look at like the grouping of the basically the takers of the One Ring, right? They were this mixed batch of heights, sizes, and that provided
Skills.
all kinds of benefits and advantages in all kinds of things.
Yep.
But in D&D, it kind of like literally cuts it off at the legs and just says, no, everybody's medium for the sake of logistics and fairness. But really, what does that mean for if you're trying to play this little tiny halfling or God forbid you want to play a fairy or a pixie, right? And so it's the idea of, okay, well, it's very, everyone has to be the same size, so mechanically nothing can be really thrown. I think it's bullshit.
It's a little bullshit. It really is. Especially when the miniatures reflect the size, at least to some extent.
Or try to.
Yeah, and so you get confused, right? Because you're like, well, my miniature, like especially if you're doing a really tiny character like a pixie or a fairy, you're like, well, they're small. They're really small. Why wouldn't they be able to do this stuff? And then they're just told they can't.
Right, and that's the thing too. It's there are like homebrew rules out there for different sizing. So like in our case, we have a character in our party that is tiny, right? And so they have a whole unique set of rules based on their small stature, right? So it's not impossible to incorporate. But it is this idea of like trying to create a universality for them all, but it in turn makes it kind of neutered. And like one big thing that we discovered very early on, now this was when we started going into the 3D printer game and buying stuff that was printed. Like I don't think most people know that there are really two sizes of miniatures. There's the 28 millimeter and there's like the 32, 35 millimeter. And for us Americans who don't really understand millimeters, there's actually a big difference.
There's a huge difference.
And even then, you can have a mixture of minis, even in that sizing perspective, that's going to change how big, the human is compared to the orc that's supposed to be 8 feet tall and the human's 4 foot.
Yeah.
But yet the minis are actually right around the same height.
Yep, maybe a little bit of difference, but frankly, when there's like a foot or more difference between characters, it really should be reflected in the miniature. and in gameplay too, right? Like, I just think there should be those advantages and disadvantages to being different sizes. Like you had stated, with one of our players being tiny, they have a little bit of advantage in being more stealthy and being able to get into smaller places. But then they also have disadvantages to being that small, right? They can get splatted if they're not careful, or they can get trapped really easily if someone knows what they're doing. So I think those advantages and disadvantages should be brought into the game. They should be used, because we give these assignations for size. So why not use them?
Yeah, and I think that's what really really kind of pisses me off so much about 5e is that they've literally incorporated it in some of the metrics of the game, right? So like when you play a extremely small character, they give you the nimble feature, right? So they go, oh look, you're so small, you can go between the legs of characters and you can occupy the same space and all this cool stuff, right? But you're not small. You're not small.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the, the large back, or I can't remember what the exact name of the feature is, but it essentially says, okay, you're a medium creature, but you can hold the strength of a large creature. You can carry the same encumbrance. Your strength is extra on this, but you're not large.
No.
So to me, it's like, why are we going so far out of our way to then give those abilities when it's so simple just to allow for characters to be various heights, just like we have existing in reality and in lores. So it's just like, it is one of those things that's always kind of been a thing of contention at our party, because it is something that it's like, we want to get involved. We want to have these perspectives. And so if you do play these tiny characters and you want to play and you're already like in that mode, you're like, oh my God, I'm 2 foot tall. I'm always going to be thinking I'm 2 foot tall. I'm behind this crate. I'm behind this basket. Oh, is there's this, how tall is it? Oh, it's a foot and a half. The game still says you're going to be around 3 to 5 feet tall because you're a medium creature no matter what. So technically
you're
not
have cover.
It doesn't matter.
No.
And that's where I think we lose a little bit of allowing players and dungeon masters to play more into the characters because we're going, okay, we have these, you're in this character, we're going to let you make this character small, but mechanically, you're always going to have to become a medium character.
It's basically saying mechanically we can't or won't.
And it's a freaking game. We can do whatever the hell we want, right? Yeah. Like, we can pick and choose what we want. Yeah. And so, like, the other thing, too, is, like, where this really always kind of gets me is, like, the perspective of miniatures, right? And this is a long debate at our table.
Big debate.
And kind of a gripe. Whereas, and you kind of showed it in the beginning. There's so many ways that Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast have made changes, even to, hell, I could probably grab a couple, even to like dragons, where the originals were much smaller so that they could obviously be packaged, and then they have these other ones that are the exact same dragon, but they are now significantly larger.
Oh, yeah.
And so it makes it tough, because if you're trying to, especially if you're actual tabletop and you're in home, in person, and you want to create that scale, it's really hard when, you're like, oh, this big bad, and you put a mini down that's basically the same size as your players, because the way that the mechanics of the minis are, it's like, he's hulking, he looks huge, and technically he's 11 foot tall, but the mini's in 28 millimeter print and obviously is much smaller in diameter.
Yeah.
So it comes where you kind of lose a little bit of that emphasis of kind of the dynamic, right?
Because it deflates it a little bit.
Yeah, you're looking at all these kind of similar sized minis. I mean, pull it up. You have the perfect example.
So this right here is a normal.
Back a little.
Right here.
Let it zoom.
Is a normal human. Let me see if my hand will help.
There we go.
Is a normal human size miniature. This is the medium standard, and then a kenku is supposed to be small.
Smaller than that.
But they are the exact same.
Roughly, I mean.
Pretty close.
Pretty close.
There is not much of a difference. Maybe half a foot in terms of ratio. So that doesn't scream small to me for the kenku.
Right, and so then when you're playing, and you're looking at that visually now, so you have both the mental mechanics and now the visual mechanics as well. And I think you as the mini painter also did point this out, in that like, if it gets too tiny for the realism, God help you to paint that thing.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the pixie, right? You kind of have to sacrifice detail.
I painted this guy. Let me see if I can.
We gotta get better. We gotta get better cameras.
Sort of. See how small that is? I did do some detail work in here, but frankly, The eyes are like the biggest thing I did that I'm super proud of. And that's about as detailed as I got. Most of everything else is just kind of like just big splashes of color in terms of the miniature itself. So it's a lot more difficult to convey that level of detail in a smaller miniature. So it is tough, and it presents a toughness. But I think it's a really good challenge to have.
Yeah, and that's where it is too, right? It's you can only go so small, and so I know there's like we have to have a modicum of imagination, right?
Yeah.
We have to leave some of it to our mind, and
Right,
it's not
right.
always. But I think there's still kind of like a middle ground because I think also if you understand you're a small character, you're not going to have this super detailed miniature.
No. And even the pixie miniature hat is small, right? It's very small. It's tiny. But when you put it next to a medium-sized miniature,
It still doesn't look that small.
it's about half the size, which is not the size of that creature. They're about a foot tall, which would be maybe the height of the boots, maybe if that. So there's only as small as you can get with minis.
Yeah, and then also I will give credit in that Eric, one of our players, has a lot of like the newer, as well as Dan has a lot of the newer minis, and they're doing a lot more with these like clear bases, right?
Yeah.
And so they're trying to go, okay, look, the base simulates the size of the creature.
Yep.
If you put it down and it takes 4 squares, 4 blocks in a square, that is a large creature.
Yeah,
And as it goes more and more, it becomes the gargantuan, the
size.
huge, ginormous. And so by having the bases also be clear, it allows you to still kind of like what I envision is like if it's this giant, dragon or creature, well, if you can't see underneath it, then it loses a little bit of the effect of my character is small. But now with these see-through bases, you still see your grid line, you still see that your character can kind of hop onto the base, move around to simulate the fact that you are now physically under the creature.
Right?
So I think
like
that's
that.
a great middle ground that I will give a little clemency to because it does simulate that or symbolize, excuse me, that WotC is trying to make a better understanding, which is also why they've re-released a lot of these dragon miniatures to be more reflective of their kind of actual stature. Because I kind of use a lot of the other ones as more young dragons and then use the bigger ones for more adult, ancient. Of that sort. Because really, the miniatures, it's really hard to create that perspective because most boss creatures are these huge, detailed, but then maybe too huge.
Yeah, sometimes the ratio that you see towards the medium is a little strange, and you don't. The realism gets a little bit distorted because you're like that to me is huge. That's beyond giant. That's like when the ancient gods punch through Cabin in the Woods, like that's ginormous.
Yeah, right.
How are you supposed to even know that ratio? But that's supposed to be like a gargantuan type of size. But that's even bigger, I think, than gargantuan.
Yeah, and I think that goes into a lot of the scope of miniatures and why I think there's a lot of fun when it comes to the digital side because they can keep that perspective a little easier with like tokens and stuff. And there is that little advantage that comes, I think, with the online market in that you can keep the perspective a little more simple.
Whereas, and you can include rules that affect that.
I mean, how many of you guys out there have stories where your dungeon master just puts like a a plushie or their cat or something that is a symbol for this big creature because really there's no miniature that's going to really create that essence of, oh my god, it's this towering beast of a thing.
And
but
frankly, this is D&D, you got to get creative.
You got to be creative, right? And I think it goes into like the other subject because we were talking that like thinking about size in Dungeons and Dragons is not just your miniature and your character size, but like kind of all like encompassing ideas.
Yeah.
And the way I looked at it, and I was sharing it with you, DNDWife, and I wanted to get anyone else's opinion, is that the whole leveling up thing is really, in essence, useless. It really doesn't do anything in the context of like abilities and points, right? So the way I share this is that like, so for example, if like you do an attack and it does like 1d6 and you're using the d6 and you're doing this damage, but as you level up, it becomes 2d6s, 3d6s, 4d6s, right?
You get more powerful.
But at the same time, your monsters, your creatures are also getting more health, so it's taking more shots anyway. And so at the end of the day, your level ups really unless you're getting abilities, mind you, but
to affect
the
that,
damaging abilities, I think, are complicating stuff too much sometimes, in that that's all they really are. It's just bloating the numbers to be a larger number, because obviously we love big numbers. You know, usually most tables I think have always that race to who gets to 100 damage or who gets to 50 damage,
or HP, the HP
but
race.
at the same time, you know, as a dungeon master for 8 so years now, you know, there are times where I'm watching players, you know, throwing down just dice after dice, and then they're counting, and it's math, and it's this forever. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's the same ratio of like the monster's hit points to what damage you're doing.
So instead
it's
of
like
10 hit points, they have 100.
Yeah, so it's like we could have got this done like this, and it still would have been like, oh man, max damage, this is gone, this is. But because, you know, the way that the evolution or the level system runs, it's always like this idea of, well, more clickety clackities.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest example I think are rogues, right? Rogues with their freaking, you know, sneak attack, and it's just like adding these dice. But at the end of the day, it's like, dice. You know, burst damage is burst damage, whether it's 40 or 100. If the creature has a you know, perspective health, it's never really going to be seen as different.
Yeah, good point. I get that. I get that.
I know it's such a nuanced thought process, because people are like, I love my level ups. Do not give me any nothings. I need everything. I want to roll 100 d10s if I can, because it's, I get it. I get it.
And then the dice goblins are like, hey, I like rolling all those dice. Why would you take that away from me?
I mean, I will concede that there are cool times, especially when the table has to come together, where it's like, oh, I gotta roll 18 d6s, and so everyone's starting to group together their dice. I get it. There are moments like that. But generally speaking, I feel like it kind of can be a little bit of a waste in terms of the bloat with some of the spells and abilities.
Yeah.
And gets to a point where sometimes you start not looking at other spells and abilities in the long run, because
they don't do the
they
level.
Don't grow. They don't get more powerful over time. You know, a lot of people stick with only abilities that are going to get stronger
on each
stronger,
level, or, you know, at a certain level.
Yeah, ignoring any kind of utility or whatnot.
Yeah, that's one thing I think. That's my hot take this round.
Oh snap! You're starting us off. You're starting off.
Sorry, yeah, I have to do it now because you brought it up.
Okay.
But y'all need to pick more utility spells, like
tired of all the fireballs.
No, but like,
oh, okay.
But I think that the biggest thing about D&D is, you know, you're exploring what a character would do and how they would be. And so part of that is getting spells that aren't necessarily always damage based. There are certain things that even the most bloodthirsty or most hardened soldier have on them that isn't always just about the damage. There could be a soldier with like OCD, so they have prestidigitation to make sure that everything around them is clean at all times. That's a thing, right? That's a thing that's a utility. That's not really anything that has to do with gameplay or combat, but it's something that enriches the character. So get more spells like that, and it's not just always benign spells like that. There are certain other spells or cantrips or things that can be used in more unique and interesting ways. Like Druidcraft creates noises. You can use those as distractions, ways to lure things, right? Same with prestidigitation. So there are really cool ways to use these utility spells that people just, I guess, in my opinion, my hot take, are too lazy to think of. So, you know, let's get a little creative. That's what D&D is about. It's about exploring and making those creative juices flow.
I think it's a good one. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, want to put it in our faces, go right ahead. It'll pop up right in the middle for the world to see. Don't be afraid. If you are, you can always shoot it over to the Discord, that we can also get it there if you do not wish to see your comment be put on.
That way we can just ask the question.
If you're a little shy, do not worry. But that kind of leads me into my next kind of the point when we were talking about all things size and whether it matters. And another thing we were talking about was table size.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
And I think this is kind of a misnomer. And one of the struggles I see on Reddit, and I see other things, is this idea of these large tables. These large, you know, we see it Critical Role. We see it in Dimension 20, you know, where it's like, 7, 8, especially with guest players. I think they were saying like the Critical Role finale had 11 players at one point. Holy shit, 11 fucking players at once. That's insane.
No, thank you.
But at the same time, when your 11 players are professional voice actors,
they can move that story along, right? Like we can
they're
have
all
people.
gonna know what's up, you know, and especially when it's like a very long end of the finale, you're gonna have your guests and stuff.
Yeah, and you need to rotate out those people.
I think there is this idea that like you need to have a ton of players at your table, and that's really gonna add so much more in terms of content. Because the idea is like, oh well, if it's just say 3 of us, well man, that's 3 of us. That's we have to do everything, you know. And if we're not jack of all trades, then we're not going to be able to do anything. We're going to be missing. Oh, if someone doesn't be rogue, okay, well, we're never opening a lock. If someone's not a cleric, we have no heals. And I think that gets
one
tough.
of each.
But as a DM who's run a table for many years with 6 players, 5 players, you know, I've always had a large amount. And don't get me wrong, it's great because it does allow for, I think, more solo opportunities.
Yeah, ways to go off, do things.
That is the advantage, right? Because players are afraid to go off by themselves. But if they can have a battle buddy, and they can go off and they can run and they can, you know, have someone to watch their back, they're more inclined to do those kind of things.
Absolutely.
Excuse me.
I think so. You know, that's a part of it too, is it isn't always a drawback to have a big party, but sometimes it can, because we're not all of us players professional voice actors or just professional players, it can bog the table down a bit, right? Like having so many voices speaking out all at once, or you run the risk also, like some people who aren't necessarily in the scene at the moment get bored and then they start having their own conversations, disrupting the table. So there's a lot of pros and cons to different, you know, it's all about finding, I guess, that great balance between size.
Yeah, because as me as a dungeon master, I do enjoy a larger table in the sense because it does allow for less times of silence. As you know, sometimes it's hard for people to take the lead, and when there's more people, there's more opportunities for people to kind of step in and be like, oh, okay, this is my time to shine, and have kind of more perspectives. And I think that's the biggest thing I do grant with larger tables is that D&D is about perspectives. It's about having multiple viewpoints to solve problems. And so as you have more eyes, more ways to think, more ways to look, I feel like you can have a kind of a more deeper in kind of adventure because you have so many people who can pick up on stuff. Whereas if you have like 3 players,
it's all about survival.
3 chances, right? So if they miss something or if something is not there or they do not have a skill, that could be a part of a story that is missed. But at the same time, missed stories aren't missed opportunities. They're just the openings for something down the road or say,
another campaign.
Who knows, right? Like, and that's what the cool thing about that. And that's why it's like, you know, I recommend you get as many as you can handle and as many as you can get. Scheduling is the mother of all bitches of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop, right? So obviously adding more people, that's more scheduling problems. Getting people to get together, especially if they're adults with families and personal lives. We have a notorious habit. I don't know what it is. It's a curse. I hate it. I hate it with a passion. But every time I schedule a session, it's on a goddamn holiday.
Always.
And, you know, for us who don't necessarily have family events and stuff like that, pretty easy. But when most of your players have wives, kids, and other kinds of things like that, they tend to be indisposed during those times. And it causes some problems because it seems to always happen that way. But because of that, if you start gaining more and more people, you're just going to be dealing with more and more scheduling problems. Honestly, to me, the golden ratio is always going to be 3. That has been the grand fantasy ratio since the history, right? It's a spellcaster, a rogue, and a fighter.
Boom. Basic party.
I mean, you can change the rogue for a cleric if you want, but the spellcaster is supposed to take both. But there you go. You kind of can do everything, right? And so that's really the way to look at it. I mean, it's not necessarily a hot take, but it is kind of the most efficient way to look at it. But obviously, at this point, we're going to open it up to anyone in the chat. Now, any questions you have, any kind of things you're looking for, whether it's about the topic or not, now is the time to ask. But to give that, as you give you guys an opportunity to think of anything you might want to ask, my particular hot take in terms of this subject matter is I just kind of think that you know, not allowing your players to be different sizes is lazy. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. For a dungeon master to sit there and go, no, you're a hobbit, but you're medium, I think it's just a lazy act. It's just trying to group everything together so you don't have to think about the extra mechanics of characters and their sizes. And I really want to compare this to like flight. right? It's that same kind of mechanic. It's like, okay, well, I want to create a world. Okay, you can be any character, just no wings, no flight, none of that. And it's like, okay, but there are pros and cons. You limit, you control, and you don't necessarily.
If you get shot out of the sky, how many feet do you fall?
Right, there's all kinds of stuff. And so it is one of those things where it's like, look, give it a shot. Don't be lazy. Allow your characters to have this free form of expression. Allow characters to play stuff other than like the master 6 races of Dungeons and Dragons. And it's like everyone's a human, a rogue, an elf, a dwarf, a halfling. No, but there are so many other classes and races out there. But because of size differences, you want to be a tiny grung, be a tiny grung, right?
Yeah, do it.
But it's like because of the way the game works and the mechanics, there's never an incentive to be something different.
Experiment
and that's,
with that, yeah.
I think, lazy dungeon master work and lazy writing in terms of the mechanics of the game. Because not everybody's medium.
Right. And there is the developers are somewhat at fault at this because that's obviously something they can work on and something that would probably be a really cool thing to work on, in my opinion. But it also falls to the DMs because at the end of the day, D&D and the systems like that are just built for the dungeon master to build upon, not to use as like just the set rules unless that's what you want. So ultimately it is up to the dungeon master to kind of incorporate certain aspects to enrich that gameplay. So yeah, I agree.
See,
do a little bit of work there.
I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like anytime that you can allow more creativity or more ways for your players to get into the perspective of their characters. I'm a small character. I think when I'm low, or I'm this tall, hulking, monstrosity. So maybe I have a running joke where I'm constantly banging my head into a door frame, right? And it's not going where somebody who's a rules lawyer is going to go, well, that's not how it works. It's like, well, you know what? Tall people exist, all right?
It happens.
And small people exist.
I've seen it.
Why we ignore this in a game about creativity and freedom makes no sense. But the last thing we want to end on, which is a very, very big and important announcement from us. And I feel like this was the best place to do this announcement. I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
We are happy to announce we have officially reached 100 subscribers on YouTube.
Yay!
In basically about a year since we started YouTube at the very beginning, doing just our audio podcasts, we have now grown, and it's been crazy. These last month has seen 25 new subscribers in a month, and it has been amazing. And we can only thank everyone out there, the connections that we're making. We have been just having so much fun. But what this triggers is our grand event of giving away a custom painted mini by yours truly, DNDWife.
Thank you.
But what we are going to do for the next month is going to be getting everyone verified of their subscription. So if you want to be qualified for the drawing, you're going to need to post that subscription status so that we know that you are subscribed to Couple of Nerds Productions on YouTube. So that way we can make sure we get all those good subscriptions and you are entered into the drawing. And then once we get that, we will have a live stream drawing where show where DNDWife here will basically take suggestions and be basically painting it live for everyone to watch.
Yep. We'll do a drawing one, and then we'll also do a live painting stream.
And we're going to roll, it's obviously with 100, so we're going to roll a D100 live, and that is going to be what decides who gets the miniature.
Yep.
And we'll connect with them so that way we can get that all squared away. But we are very, very thankful for everyone to go this far. And honestly, we have been having such a blast. If you've been catching us on Twitch as we have been playing on the Harvest PvE Project Zomboid server. Shout out to Boobam and the agency out there as we've been playing now for a couple of weeks, and we should be posting some more content soon. Keep an eye out. We're going to probably be doing a live, you heard it from us, live stream show of the ending finale that's going to be going on. So you're going to be seeing us going into it before. We can't do at the event, but we will be posting the video later. But we're going to do kind of a little celebration show before we get started. Let all the agency guys talk and kind of give a little perspective and have a little fun. You guys get to kind of ride along with us on that. So we're really excited to do that.
Absolutely.
So any final notes, anything you want to add, D&D Wife, that you want to let the group know?
No, I think that says it all. Please go ahead and join Discord. Let us know that you post up there that you've joined, because I'm really excited about painting this miniature. I
Oh
want,
yeah, and check out
want
our
to get
new
it done.
Discord. We've adjusted a lot of new things. There's a whole new look. Please go in and check out and select your role. As you pick different roles, you will see different things open up in the Discord for you. So if you want to see all of it, make sure you pick the roles that will best fit what you like to see.
Yeah, there's things like artist, a bunch of different
Whether you're
stuff.
a streamer, oh yeah,
Everything. So
everything's there.
And then that way you don't have to see the stuff you're not interested in, right?
Exactly.
So yeah. All right, nerds, that's all the chaotic fun we've got for tonight. So you heard it from us. And yes, in TTRPGs, size definitely does matter sometimes.
Great. Thanks for hanging out with us live on Twitch. If you liked the laughs, the lore, and the questionable jokes, give us a follow, drop us a review, and join our Discord to keep this conversation going.
Until next time, may your dice be big, your characters bold, and your stories massive. We'll see you next episode.
Catch you later, party people. Stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.